we're going to move forward, and hopefully others will join us as we progress through the presentation. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Strategies for Calculating Future Medical Costs. This afternoon's one-hour interactive webinar will focus on the following issues. Life care planners develop life care plans, determining the future needs, services, and costs of care for the patient over his or her lifetime. During this presentation, Varsha Desai will talk about exactly what that means for your case and or your client. Life care planners regularly work with both plaintiff and defense attorneys to assess clients to project their future medical care and services. Our presenter, Varsha Desai, will talk about how those assessments are done and what factors are used to determine the future cost projections or future care projections. And we're going to talk about the methodology used behind a nurse life care plan or medical cost projection and the differences in the two projected cost plans and how each of these are used in litigation. The presenter for today's webinar is Varsha Desai. Varsha is a registered nurse with over 16 years of experience in medical, surgical nursing, nursing homes, assisted living, home health care, medical case management, clinical database development, medical review for pharmaceutical products and litigation, pharmaceutical drug safety surveillance, and healthcare management consulting. As the founder of Alliance Medical Legal Consulting, Varsha and her nurse consultants and experts work with attorneys and insurance companies to provide medical record interpretation, review and summary, timeline and chronologies, comprehensive reviews for personal injury, medical fact witnessing, defense medical examinations, observation reports, medical billing coding review, medical cost projection, nurse life care plans, and Medicare set-asides. Varsha has a Bachelor in Science of Nursing from Widener University. She has a registered nurse's license in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and a certificate in legal nurse consulting, and a certificate in nurse life care planning, and has completed coursework in Medicare set-asides. Varsha has worked for large hospital systems in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, major pharmaceutical companies, and healthcare management consulting. In addition to being a legal nurse consultant and certified nurse life care planner, Varsha is clinically active in home care and until 2007 was clinically practicing in nursing homes and assisted living centers. Varsha recently completed her Master of Nursing level courses in wound and ostomy care and plans to achieve nursing certification in wound and ostomy care in 2010. Varsha is active in a professional organization as president-elect of the Philadelphia chapter of the Association of Legal Nurse Consultants and a member of the American Association of Nurse Life Care Planners. If you have any questions that pertain to this presentation, please use the Q&A feature or the chat feature, which is found here on the right-hand side of the screen. Varsha will do her best to answer your questions during the two question and answer sessions that will occur during this presentation. Approximately 1 hour after the event, we'll send out an email with a link to the archived recording of this webinar. And we do ask that you take time to fill out the survey that will appear on your screen after the webinar is over. I invite you now to sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. I'm going to turn it over to our distinguished presenter, Varsha. Varsha, it's all yours.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. First, I'd like to thank everybody for taking time out of their schedule to join me and TASA on this webinar for strategies for calculating future medical costs. My hope is that after I get done talking that nobody will be asleep and at least you'll have gained one piece of knowledge or something new that you didn't know before. And even if you do, you do know a lot about the life care plan process, hopefully understanding how a nurse can really be one of the best weapons in your back pocket as a nurse life care planner. You'll be able to come away with something from that. And like Matt said, please feel free to ask questions, and I will do my best to answer them as we move along. So we'll get started. the first slide, I'm just going to talk about what actually the life care plan is. To this day, I still receive calls from a lot of attorneys with somebody told me I needed a life care plan and I don't know what that is. So I just wanted to kind of go over what the description is that I use based on my background as a nurse. And essentially that the life care plan, it's a tool. It is a tool used for the purpose of estimating the medical and non-medical needs of a person, not just with a catastrophic injury, but it could be chronic disease, a chronic condition, such as chronic pain. And the goal of this plan is to address and project out for the future what the costs and frequencies are going to be for the things that they're going to need over the rest of their life to take care of them or to create achieve what I like to say, a maximum level of quality as much as possible with their injuries. The other half of that is something called the medical cost projection, and this is another question that I often get from a lot of attorneys is, what's the difference between the medical cost projection and your life care plan? And essentially, the medical cost projection will do the same. It's a tool again, and it's used for the purpose of estimating medical and non-medical needs. However, I have found, in my experience, from both the insurance and working with some of our clients who use these extensively, is that it tends to be estimating costs for what I like to say a small or limited injury. Commonly, we use these in auto accidents. On the insurance side, we'll use them for setting reserves. I also use these in chronic pain or chronic diseases or conditions where the injury is only going to get better to a certain point, and that's it. The individual could still continue to work, or they may work in a limited capacity. And there's two examples here that I've used. One is the chronic condition, such as chronic pain, where they're going to need medications for the rest of their life, but it doesn't prohibit them or deter them from working or, again, working in a limited capacity. The other thing the medical cost projection would be used for is for the future cost of a surgery or procedure. Again, I've used these a lot in auto accidents where there may need to be a knee replacement, a hip replacement, or several cosmetic surgeries related to surgery that was required as a result of an accident. So essentially, the two are the same in the sense of they're both projecting for the future. One may go longer, but as you'll see, the methodology behind both of them will be the same. Okay, I'm going to talk today about the strategy of how to use your nurse life care planner. And I'm sure there's going to be a question, and if I haven't already seen it, someone's going to say, well, what's the difference between the nurse life care planner and the life care planner who is not a nurse? For example, a vocational specialist, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, some of the psychologists that are out there. Neither one is bad, neither one is good. We all have different experiences in our own practices of what we feel comfortable with, of what we've used, or maybe we just don't know that there's somebody else out there. So why the nurse life care planner? And if any of you can kind of stop and think about a time, whether you've been in a hospital or a family member, you'll have come across a nurse. Somewhere in your lifetime, you have come across a nurse. We are in every continuum of the healthcare system. The other point to that is that registered nurses, and I think this is new for a lot of people, registered nurses have been writing plans of care since the beginning of our career. And what that means is we have been planning care, whether it's been for somebody that's been in an outpatient setting for a day, for our rehab patients who are with us for months and months, for example, in a traumatic brain injury type of setting, or for their lifetime in the case of litigation with a catastrophic type of injury. So we have had to write care plans. It's part of our scope of practice, and I'll talk about that further in the presentation, and why that is so important when you bring on a nurse life care planner on your case. The foundation of our nurse life care plan is based on the nursing process as defined by the Nurse Practice Act. And that foundation of the nursing process is found not just in your state level of the Nurse Practice Act, which every state has, but also from the American Nurses Association, which is the professional and recognized organization for nurses. And because the foundation of the nurse life care plan is based on the nursing process, nursing, it's not a junk science. We are a scientific body of knowledge that uses an evidence-based approach in practice. So that is our foundation as nurses. It's scientific, and for anybody out there who does med-mal and has had to use nurse experts, that's why we would be admitted into court, because our profession is not junk science. It's evidence-based and it's scientific. And the Nurse Life Care Planner is guided by several organizations and standards. The first being the ANA, which is for all nurses. The second would be the American Association of Nurse Life Care Planners, the American Association of Rehabilitation Nurses, and the American Association of Legal Nurse Consultants. And you can find all of their standards online on any of their websites. If you Google them, you will find the standards. I won't go into what the individual standards are. So we're scientific. We have a foundation of the nursing process that's based on our scientific knowledge and evidence-based approach, and we practice in all areas of healthcare. So we've seen patients and we've seen clients like yours in almost any setting that most of us have worked on. And as a result of that, we've had to write a plan of care for somebody. And Matt mentioned that I'm still active in home health care. And when I go out to admit a patient onto our service, I write a plan of care for their future. What is their next 3 months going to be in home health care? What are we going to do for them? What is their equipment needs? What services are they going to need? And that's required by Medicare. So that's pretty awesome, I think, to have that as part of your scope of practice, which other professions, such as therapists or vocational specialists, may not have as part of their scope of practice. Okay, so I talked about, first, why you should use a nurse. Now, the process behind that nursing process, this is really what I think is so awesome about being not just a nurse, but using that process when I write a life care plan. And again, the nursing process is dictated, it's by the American Nurses Association, which is our umbrella organization. It administers our examinations to become a nurse, so they are authoritative. Just as the AMA is for physicians, the ANA is for nurses. And this is a little bit I'm going to talk about how we use this process in writing the nurse life care plan. The nursing process is broken up into these 5 components. The first being assessment, the second being analysis, issue identification, and diagnosis, the third being outcomes, planning, and then the last being evaluation. Now, the first one is the assessment. And in the clinical setting, the assessment would be, I'm in a patient room and I, take your blood pressure and I do a head-to-toe assessment. I'm looking at, your cardiopulmonary system, neurological, respiratory, your gastrointestinal system, all your systems. That same component of assessment is transferred over into the nurse life care plan, and with a couple of added features to that. So I'm going to kind of do it as somebody's called me for a life care plan, and I'm just going to use a spinal cord patient because I've used that as an example in further down in the presentation. So we have a spinal cord injury. The first thing I'm going to do in this life care plan is I'm going to make an assessment. And that's going to involve a couple of different things. The first one, and I'm going to talk about catastrophic here, and then kind of branch it into how you might use that for medical cost projection. In the catastrophic end, or the chronic disease or condition end, I would actually go out and physically make a home visit. I would go see your client. Now I'm talking plaintiff at this point. And during that home visit, it's a very holistic approach to collect data. It's essentially just like doing a physical exam on a client who was hospitalized. I'm going to look at their functional level. I'm going to look at their family, their social, their cultural, their spiritual. I'm going to ask them, how do you go to the bathroom? How do you climb stairs? How do you get in and out of bed? How do you cook for yourself? We have a 13-page assessment form that we actually use, and it follows you from head to toe. And we see, how do you live your life every day with this injury? You know, how do you do this? The second piece of that assessment is we'll review the medical records. Now, if I'm on the defense side, unless I have a really kind plaintiff attorney who lets me go out and see their injured client, I would be getting a picture from the medical records. If I'm critiquing the life care plan at this point, it's already been done, and my defense attorney is handing this over to me, I would be looking at what their assessment was that they did in their life care plan. So I've got medical records, I've got the actual home visit. The other piece is nursing is a collaborative practice. Wherever we practice, in a hospital, in a home care, in a nursing home, in a doctor's office, nurses collaborate with other providers. So our life care plan, and I hope this answers a couple questions, it's never done in a void. And what I mean by collaborate is, first, it involves whoever the treating physician providers are. For example, for our spinal cord, it might be a urologist, it might be the physiatrist, there might be an orthopedic doctor involved, whoever the various disciplines are that are treating or have been treating in the last several months. We collaborate with the providers. You can't write a plan of care just by looking at articles and reading books. You really need to talk to the people that are involved. So we'll collaborate in one of several ways. The first way is for our treating providers, specifically the physicians, we will pick up the phone and call them, and we'll schedule appointments. Sometimes your clients are seeing these providers, and we'll go out with them and we'll ask our questions about medications, future surgeries, future treatments. And we'll work with them to see, you know, hey, I was out there in the home and this is what I saw. What do you think about this? The second way might be in actually writing. Sometimes because of distance or that, it's not possible, so we'll put together like a questionnaire, you know. The same way I would ask my physicians when I'm out in a clinical setting, I found, you know, I did an assessment and here are the things, I've reviewed the records. Can you comment on future surgeries, on treatments, on the current medications, future medications, psychological needs, things like that. A third way, which is a way that a lot of my attorneys work with me, is they have reports written by the treating providers. They're not extensive. There may be 1 or 2 pages, and they talk about what their thought process is about the future for this individual. And it's been really helpful to me because I take their reports and then it may just involve a phone call, scheduling some time with this treating provider, and saying, hey, I read your report, I had some questions, and we seem to work together really well. I don't know if that's something everybody does. I'm just going on my experience. It seems that many of the attorneys that I work with do that, and I really love it because it kind of gives me a little insight into what the treating provider might be thinking. I also use the expert reports like that too sometimes in cases where, due to financial reasons or other various reasons, we don't have a recently active treating provider. Another way is I've also asked is to go out as part of that assessment is to find a provider who we can have assess this client who hasn't been recently treated in order to have that collaboration and someone to say, you know, here's my assessment on records and in person. What do you think? And on the defense end, I would probably do that with the experts that were the physician experts were on that side. So my assessment isn't just done in a void. It's using the whole system, the family, in person if it's possible, collaborating with the treating providers, and also collaborating with other providers, therapists, social workers, anybody else who's involved with this person. I want as much input into my plan of care as possible. And that collection of data is used to support those cost tables and that final number. So once we've done the assessment, the next thing we want to do is look at this. We want to analyze all this data. I've gotten all this input, records. I have my own notes from doing a home assessment. And I'm going to look at that and identify what are their issues. And this is something, the next piece, which I think is going to be new to a lot of people, if it has never been explained to you, is I'm going to develop a diagnosis. And I have gotten this, what do you mean? You're a nurse. You can diagnose? And I say, yes. However, when we mean nursing diagnosis, it's referring to not a medical diagnosis. Essentially, the nursing diagnosis is the response to the medical condition. And I will get into that in the next slide, so if it sounds confusing, just hang in there for a minute. After we formulate a nursing diagnosis, we will prescribe a strategy of care. So the next question I get is, what do you mean you can prescribe? You can not just diagnose, but you can prescribe. And I say, yes, I can prescribe a strategy of care. And just so you know, those words are directly out of my Nurse Practice Act. And then we plan the care, which is all the things you see in the cost tables of a life care plan, and we evaluate. And many times people will ask in a nurse life care plan, why do you put for a case manager? What is the role of the medical case manager or nurse case manager? As part of following my process, in order to evaluate the effectiveness of the life care plan and its outcomes, we include a case manager to implement, negotiate with that client, whatever services were recommended. Okay, the nursing diagnosis. The nursing diagnosis is used to formulate an individualized life care plan. The nursing diagnosis is essentially used in any care plan, whether you're in a hospital, again, a nursing home, home care, or you're a catastrophically injured client. The nursing diagnosis is the treatment or response of human experiences in response to their health, illness, or life process. And we base these diagnoses on our assessments, on the input that we've received from the treating providers, and it's the basis for prescribing this, what I was referring to, the strategy of care. Okay, and here's the example I'm going to use to kind of tie in that probably slightly boring nursing school lecture you just got, and that is prescribing the strategy of care. So we have your client, and is a 40-year-old male, and he suffered a spinal cord injury after a fall from the roof. He's taken to the hospital. He has a medical diagnosis of paraplegia. Okay? I go out there, I look at the records, I talk to his wife. He's got a small child at home. They're living in a little apartment. He used to work. Now he can't walk. He can't drive. He has no function of his bowel or bladder. And this is really hard. They're a young couple, and they're having difficulty coping with all of this. Now, the nursing diagnosis is the response. We formulate the nursing diagnosis, which is what is this young man's response to his medical diagnosis? Medical diagnosis is paraplegia. The nursing diagnosis is impaired mobility, self-care deficit, caregiver role strain, impaired family process. Now, someone will ask, did you make these up, Varsha? Where do you get these? Where are these from? These are actually recognized nursing diagnosis, there's a group called NANDA, which stands for, and I'm going to find my book here, the NANDA NANDA International, NANDA International, which is, if you bear with me, it's the National Association for Nursing Diagnosis. And this is what all nurses use, again, regardless of where they are and how they're writing a plan. So if you ever see a life care plan of mine, you will see these nursing diagnoses built right in there. I made an assessment that this 40-year-old man is not able to drive or walk. His response to the paraplegia is impaired mobility. Now, what is my plan of care, or in the case of, as ANA calls it, you're prescribing your strategy of care? He needs a wheelchair. He needs a modified van for mobility. What is his response to having no function of bowel or bladder as a result of being paraplegic? He needs to see a urologist. He's having difficulty coping with his diagnosis and lifestyle as a result of this medical diagnosis of paraplegia. The nursing diagnosis is impaired family process. What's my plan or my prescription of strategy to help, with this? It's psychological counseling for individual and family. So I hope this helps, because I found that when I explain it like this, if I can try and use an example, it helps. On the defense end of this, as a nurse, if you've hired a nurse life care planner to critique this, they would also be following the same process when they're looking at the plaintiff's life care plan. They're going to be looking at, okay, what's the medical diagnosis? What's their assessment? Is the diagnosis appropriate? Did they miss any? Is there more things that should have been in here or diagnosed? The prescribing a strategy of care, was that done in a void? Was that done, again, in collaboration with other providers and their input? So this is I think, a pretty good example of how those 6 nursing process steps break out into a life care plan. Matt, are we stopping for questions?
Yeah, I was going to say we have a couple questions here, and I think this is a good point to stop and take some of them. Lawrence asks, when developing a plan for an injured person, who qualifies for Medicare and bills will be paid by Medicare? To use the payments that will be made by Medicare as opposed to quote-unquote retail? If so, where do you get the amounts Medicare will pay?
Okay. You're delving into Medicare set-aside world here. Mr. Silverman, when we do a life care plan, it is, even if they're on Medicare, it is done at retail. Whatever their local providers or national providers, the costs are, we will do that. And just to let you know, for your information, if you do need to find out how much Medicare charges for something, you can go to the CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid website, and they have fee schedules. They're a little difficult to navigate, I think, but they do have fee schedules based by region as to how much certain services or durable medical equipment are covered by Medicare. But we do use retail for Medicare injured persons that are on Medicare. And then the second half to that might be, then there's, which I'm not familiar with, but I know there's Medicare liens and things like that get involved, which I don't deal with, but I just finished one for a Medicare patient, and there's lien and those issues involved, but the plan was written at quote-unquote retail price.
Hey, Varsha. Carol asks, how does a nurse life care planner work with the physician when developing a plan?
Okay. Again, how we work as a nurse when developing a plan of care is we collaborate. And what I mean by collaborate is we will talk to the physician, we will whether it be through writing or through calling or through, I've gone physically to see them and schedule time when it's been a very complicated case. And we will review what our assessments are along with what their assessments were and say, okay, well, here's what I'm thinking about the future, and here's what I've seen. Because many times when the physician sees this person in their office, it's very different than when you see somebody in their home, or even when you're reading records and you read a therapist's report or a social worker's report, and the physicians are looking at it very clinically. You're looking at the whole picture, the whole thing, physical, mental, spiritual, social, cultural, financial, everything. So we work with them and we get their input. I will add to that anything that would be out of scope for a nurse, such as surgeries or medications, which are medical, procedures, or medications, which as a RN, I can't prescribe medications. I will get that from the physician only. That has to come in from the physician, that input, especially for future medications or future surgeries. And in addition, I do not have my life care plan signed off by a physician or a physiatrist. I include their input and I use them in my plan. I will say, when I write my narrative, that this was in discussion with Dr. Smith, this is what we talked about. If I have it in writing, I will refer to a written report. But I don't have them, after my signature, a physician's signature does not go on that. It's not required by my scope of practice to have that, because I'm working in collaboration and their input is going in there. And it's not just a physician care plan, it's a nurse life care plan, which is a holistic plan.
Okay, Varsha, we have a question here from Thomas who asks, how do you address the Robinson v. Bates issue on future reasonable cost or expense? I'm not, and I'm sorry to say, I'm not familiar with that. So if he can either clarify that a little bit, that would be great. Could you just talk about how you basically determine reasonable costs and expenses for future years?
For future years. Well, since we're using present day, what I always try to start with is what I know some people use like kind of generic costs. I will actually, when I'm writing a plan, if you want to talk about what's reasonable now, in the plan. Because the future cost, what it's going to cost 15 years from now is determined by the economist. The cost I'm simply using is what it costs now for calculation purposes. And I use that if they're using the current provider, if they're using, Harry's medical equipment if in the case of a paraplegic, for all their, catheterization supplies, I will use what's actual right now from a real provider. If they don't have a provider, I'll go to somebody in their area. If that's not feasible, then we'll go to, sometimes we use national providers that are very well known and service that area. So as far as what's reasonable now, I try to go with an actual cost. I'm not sure if that answers your question. And as far as what it's going to cost in the future, that's left to an economist to calculate what that inflation is going to be for that glove. What is it going to cost 10 years from now?
Okay, and then Thomas, if you would like to clarify your question, please do so using the chat feature. Gerald asks, do you work with local life care planners who might be testifying at trial instead of having you testify at trial? And Nevada experts are entitled to use other experts in coming to their conclusions.
Oh, okay. I have not done that. I've never done that. A lot of the colleagues that I work with, or people, other life care planners that I network with, and that I've never heard anybody or talked to anybody about that. But that's very interesting. I'm not familiar with that. I'm in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, so I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, so why don't we continue on with the presentation. We will be taking a second Q&A break right before the conclusion of the presentation. So please, if you think of questions while Varsha's continuing to present the content, please feel free to submit them via chat or Q&A.
Okay, thank you for those questions. I appreciate it, and I hope I was able to answer them. Now, the next thing is you've got a nurse, and you kind of sort of understand how a nurse writes this care plan because of the nursing process and all of that behind that. So how does this help you? You know, how does the nurse life care plan help you? And you could probably do a whole thing just on this topic, but I'll try to go over some general things that my clients have told me and other colleagues that I work with, you know, we've talked about. Obviously, it identifies the medical and non-medical needs of a person. It's not just physicians and medications, but it's also all the other things that might be involved for the future. And this alludes to what somebody asked me, you know, the life care plan's goal is to address what's reasonable, the cost, and also the purpose for this life care plan. I've never seen a life care plan in my several years of doing this where someone's put in, you know, a boat or things, you know, we joke around about some things that some of us have seen. I haven't seen it, but the goal, I think, of the life care plan for the plaintiff should be, what does this person need for the future? And I think this is a statement I use to achieve that maximum quality now with, you know, their disability or their diagnosis or their injury. You know, how are we going to be able to achieve that for this person? What do they need from a medical and non-medical standpoint? And as far as the cost, again, it's using present-day local providers. I'm not going to use somebody in California for somebody in New Jersey just because that was convenient to get the cost. I really do try to make the effort to make it pertinent, you know, to where the person is. Also, what's medically necessary, again, to facilitate their functional ability, to get them going to whatever it is, you know, level they want to achieve, to promote that quality of life and avoid potential complications. And I think this is on both sides, on defense and plaintiff. In the pediatric cases, same, reasonable and medically necessary. You want to make sure that, and you also want to make sure that your life care plan, how it's going to help you, is that it addresses your different developmental stages. You know, at 3 years old, it might be different at 5 years old. When they're 11, if it's a female, there's physical changes. Those also need to be addressed too. And the other thing I like to explain to people is that when I'm writing my care plan and I'm writing a narrative piece, I like to call it my story. You know, I've gone in, or even if I'm on the defense and I've seen, you know, I'm not usually writing a narrative, but critiquing, I want it to be able to tell me what is going on with this person. I've gone out, especially sometimes with traumatic brain injuries, they don't really look messed up, or, you know, depending on the level of the injury, you don't see what's going on inside. And to some people, they may say, well, I don't see anything wrong, or it doesn't matter what we do. This person's so messed up. So hopefully by having your life care plan narrative also should back up your cost tables and, you know, tell that story of why all this thing and why that final number is so important in this case. And also, I think a lot of times your life care plan also, on the plaintiff side, you want it to show how it's affecting that wife or that child, or, you know, the parents or the spouses, you know, how this is affecting the family relationships. Now, on the defense side, most of the time we'd be critiquing it. We're not actually writing it. I haven't written one. I've critiqued them. And again, it's the same goal is to identify these medical and non-medical needs. Are they reasonable? Are they medically necessary? Some things you're going to look at would be, if they don't need it now, why would they need it for the future? And that's where your narrative or your collaboration is really important. You don't want your life care planner you want to make sure that that's been part of it, or at least understand that process so you can figure it out as you're reading that. Or the jury that, yeah, this person did, hey, they talked to Dr. Smith and they did work with them on this. Costs, a lot of times, this is for reasonable costs. There's double dipping you're going to look for, excessive costs. There's the issue of collateral, state and federal programs that are available, which we will in a life care plan. In some states, there are some things that are available to an individual, which it's not that they shouldn't be included, but from the defense side, you may want to look at that and say, hey, these things are available. There's pre-existing conditions you want to look at. They had diabetes before. Well, did anybody really say that it was exacerbated or worsened? This is where your physician experts would work with your life care planner. And also any pre-existing injuries from any, previous surgeries or injuries that they've had. On the workers' comp side, I wanted to talk about this in the sense of the medical cost projection, because everything you just heard would still apply in the way that I've done my medical cost projections. The reason I wanted to bring this piece is because of the medical cost projection, because it refers to that smaller or limited injury or chronic type condition, which might be in a workers' comp case, a lot of times a chronic pain from some type of work injury. On the insurance side, we're looking at it for setting reserves, and we do look at the ones that are submitted, from the plaintiff side, to see where we're falling out with setting money aside, how we're going to medically manage this case, and in the catastrophic claims, how much, from a financial standpoint, is this going to cost the insurance company? So I just wanted to add that in. Somebody's asked me a question about that before with medical cost projections. Again, with medical cost projections, a lot of mine have been used in the mediation and the settlement packages, and I'm hoping I'm using all this terminology correctly. It's used commonly. I have one attorney who uses it in his packages and brochures. The medical cost projections, that methodology is the same. That whole nursing process that was used. Again, it's just commonly used in our limited injuries or chronic conditions. I'm mostly referring to chronic pain from back injuries and things. And you know what? It helps whoever's looking at this understand the medical cost of your case. And I want to bring an example of one I've recently done. It started out as a medical cost projection. He was involved in he was a roofer. He was involved in an auto accident. And the difference between the life care plan and the medical cost projection will be I will often just make a phone call and I will do a phone assessment, same collaboration with the providers, but I will talk to them on the phone because most of the time they're back to work, or they're not working but they're functioning at home. And 40-year-old roofer, I think somebody hit him from the side, and he had an injury, back injury, underwent surgery, and as a result of the surgery, apparently he developed left foot drop. And what that is basically at his ankle joint, his foot droops down. If you've ever seen this, either in the wrist or the foot, it just droops down. And so I was given a few medical records. The doctor talked about it a little bit, but not so much how it affected his functioning. Had a really hard time trying to get a hold of this gentleman. I called my client and I said, I can't get a hold of your client. Is everything okay? And so he tracked him down, and we found out that he had fallen and went to the emergency room. He had a concussion. His girlfriend called me back and said, oh, yeah, he's been falling all the time. He's fallen 20-plus times. And I said, oh, really? Called my client back, and I said, I need to see him. I need to go out and do a home visit. There's something not right here. Went out, And this medical cost projection actually turned out to be a much, much larger, we changed it to life care plan at this point because this was going to be for the rest of his life. It wasn't just foot drop. This was a really bad foot drop. When he walked, he looked like a horse, like his leg would go up. He can't go up and down the stairs without wearing a brace. Problem with the brace is it makes him lose his balance. He obviously cannot get on a roof, and there were a lot of other underlying medical issues that resulted from this foot drop. But just from reading the medical records, it never really talked about how he functioned. It just talked about the medical. He's got foot drop, he has this much flexion, extension, various things like this. So that's a case where something we thought was going to be small ended up being much larger. We found out there were spinal cord stimulators were being recommended. The attorney had missed that, and he didn't really know about that. And by doing the review and talking, again, collaborating with the treating providers, we found that out. So his plan went from something small to much, much larger. And that's happened before, but that was a recent example. And I wanted to give that as an example of how not just using a nurse who's so familiar with just patient diagnoses, used to working with physicians, therapists, and other providers, but has been in that healthcare system and understands that. And because I have that nursing process and those assessment skills, I knew something wasn't right with this guy falling down, and just those skills kick in, and you know that. And this attorney's plan turned out, I think, even better than he thought. And hopefully this gentleman will be able to get, the things he needs for the future, because he is not going to be able to be, climbing back up on the roof again. So I just wanted to end with that thought about how we use that process and worked from a cost projection to a life care plan, because that question comes up often. And that's it. I am finished talking, so Matt, I can take some more questions since we have about 10 minutes left.
Oh, definitely. We do have a couple questions that I do want to get to. Just let me get them. Would advanced heart disease, this question is from Lauren, would advanced heart disease need a life care plan or a medical cost projection? This is in relation to projection for spousal support.
Sure, and that's interesting you brought that up, because I've had a couple discussions actually with divorce attorneys about using a cost projection when you have this. I think this was for multiple sclerosis, MS, which is a debilitating, disease. But it's slow. It progresses slow, just like advanced heart disease. I mean, advanced heart disease could end up in a heart transplant for all you know. I don't know the specifics, but thinking in worst case scenario, yes, absolutely. I've had some attorneys who practice, family law for special needs or divorce about, well, I've got a spouse and they have a condition and they have a lot of medications related to pain. In heart disease, there may be a lot of medications. There could be future surgeries. And how are they going to, how are we going to fund this if they're, the other spouse isn't going to be there anymore? So yes, it's a plan of care, and I hope that's the one thing. I hope I got that, that little bit across, that it is a plan of care written by a nurse. And I would write a plan of care for heart disease if I was working in the hospital, or I would write a plan of care for heart disease if I was in home health care, or I would write a plan of care in this type of setting for somebody who has heart disease. And there's just all that's going to be attached to it are the dollars for what all those services would cost.
Okay, great. Thomas followed up with the Robinson v. Bates case law. It's in Ohio, which limits the plaintiff's evidence of medical bills and expenses to what was actually paid by an insurance carrier. If a plaintiff in Ohio is presenting future reasonable cost and expense of a life care plan, it would seem to follow that the expert may be questioned on what would actually be paid. It is relatively new case law, and Thomas was wondering if you had seen it argued by the defense in any state or jurisdiction that you had worked in.
I have not seen that at all, and I've not had any of those discussions with my attorneys. I have a couple trials coming up, and that has not been in any of the discussions we had in preparing for trial. That has not come up. That's really interesting to know. I'd ask any, I don't know if I know any colleagues of mine that are in Ohio. I know some of my colleagues that have been, that are older than me and been doing this much longer. We've never had this discussion either, and it has not been brought up yet. And I'm not familiar with it. But that's really very interesting.
We have a question from Gerald who asks, there is an expert who says life care plan should be based on minimum life care plan so that the argument can be made that the amount of money to be asked for is the minimum amount needed to continue on. The plan should not be based on inflated costs like $200 for a special stool. Has anyone asked you to testify on a minimum life care plan? The minimum level needed to, I guess, sustain in the current state? No.
I've only ever been told that my life care plans were reasonable and thorough. And no, nobody's ever asked me to talk to about a minimum plan. Now, when I write a plan, I will tell you, I just don't pick any stool, any backbench. I try to fit whatever it is in the life care plan because of my scope of practice and experience, fit that to the client, to the injured person or, whatever their needs are. I don't just look through a catalog or something. I just did one for a tetraplegic and a double brachial plexus injury, and there's a lot of special equipment, and it's a lot of stuff. And I worked very closely with the occupational therapist, so that, it might be a $200 piece of adaptive advice, but did it make sense for this person? So when I write a plan, and I think that's why when the nurse writes a plan, they're really trying to, based on their assessment, that plan or that the prescription for strategy should be based on the assessment. It should follow with that, and that's, if somebody asked me, that's the exact answer that I would probably use.
Okay, we have a question from Nexus who asks, how does the new health care bill impact the focus on pre-existing injuries when developing a life care plan? Would it no longer be relevant? That's
a very good question. I would say that when I'm reviewing records and talking to physicians, if there are pre-existing injuries, I'm not including them unless somebody can tell me, and this would have to be from a physician, this is where we use your input, that was exacerbated or worsened or aggravated from the, whatever, the paraplegic, the chronic pain, whatever their condition is now. Since the new health care bill talks about specifically, I believe it's with insurance, that you can't, usually there's like a waiting period, 90 days, 1 year, 6 months for insurance. Since a life care plan it's not an insurance plan, I'm not sure how that it would affect. I think we would still look at it the same way that we do now. The insurers are different, so I don't know. I don't know how it would affect it, but I don't see it affecting it in any way.
Sure. There have been some questions to me about what will be available for download after this presentation is over. We will be sending out the PowerPoint that Varsha used during her presentation, as well as the link to the archive recording of this presentation. We're going to hope to get that out to you by the end of the day today, but it may get to your inbox tomorrow morning for your first cup of coffee. So we will be sending out the materials that were used during the presentation via email. It just may be tomorrow morning at the latest. Are there any more questions for Varsha? I'm not seeing any. I'll give people a couple seconds to type in questions, but I think the questions have been great, and the presentation was phenomenal. I thank Varsha for the time that she put into it. It definitely showed during the last hour, but we are going to wrap things up, I think. So, Varsha, I do want to thank you for everything that you have done putting this presentation together. It was very, very, very good. We have one last question here from Lauren, who asks, would advanced heart disease need a life care plan or a medical cost projection?
I think did we answer that one?
I
can answer
did, but did she's following up here, and she says, yes, a heart transplant is projected for the client in this case.
Yeah. When you asked that, I had a suspicion that it was something pretty, serious. The transplants are a lot of money, especially the heart transplants. There's a lot of call. I would actually call that a life care plan, because the future care that's involved. Again, the only thing that I use to differentiate the two is small or limited injury or chronic condition, but it's chronic, like not the chronic pain is small, but it's chronic pain. But in advanced heart disease that you would need a heart transplant, it's not just the heart. There's potential for other organs to be affected, like your kidneys. You can have neurological damage. So it's a little more than just chronic heart disease here. We're talking about a condition that can affect a lot of the body. Plus, you may spend a lot of time in the hospital until the heart is available if it develops to that point. So, regardless of what you want to call it, yes, I would think you would need one with the amount of dollars involved.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Varsha. And as I said before, thank you for the time that you obviously put into this presentation. And thank you to all of the attendees who took an hour out of their very busy schedule to join us today. If you'd like to talk to Varsha, not Jim, but Varsha, please contact us at 800-523-2319, or you can send me an email at mhyde@tasanet.com. We'll do our best to get you in touch with Varsha. Like I said a couple of minutes ago, we will be sending out a link to the archive recording of this webinar later on this afternoon. All the archive recordings of all our webinars are posted in the Knowledge Center, and when I send out the PowerPoint presentations to everybody, I'll be sure to include a link to the Knowledge Center. Our next client-focused webinar, that's webinars for attorneys, will be on April 29th at 2 p.m. The topic will be the top liability issues for playground injuries. Now that kids are out playing at recess again after a long and snowy winter here on the East Coast, there's a lot of opportunity to slip and fall and get hurt out there. So we want to we have a playground expert who's going to talk about where the top liability issues are and how to mitigate those risks. So please look for an invitation to that webinar. It'll hit your inbox probably later on this week. And if you have any follow-up questions, comments, suggestions for future webinar topics, please feel free to contact me at any time. My email's up on the screen, and you probably get a couple emails a month from me as well. Please feel free to reply and add your comments, questions, or, like I said, suggestions for future webinars. I thank you again, and we will hope to see you here at a future webinar. Thank you again, Varsha, and to everybody else.
Well, thank you to everybody for staying and listening. I really appreciate it, and hope I was able to impart at least one little piece that will be helpful to you in your practice. So thank you.